All right, let's get back to more of your questions. First one. Hi, thanks for answering my previous question. Next one. Why did the opening credits change style? Is it something the showrunners talked about at the time? Do you think it means anything timeline-wise about The Flash? It's also the time when Nicotero finally says Grady is gone. So we don't have a really good answer on this. I mean, nothing that's been confirmed, nothing that's really definitive. And I'm probably going to forget the details without going back to look. I want to say they changed at the beginning of season 9. Don't quote me on that because it probably wasn't real specific, but I think they changed. There were things that coincided with when they changed, but it was not in a really like specific episode cut and dried way. Like I think it was about the time that Angela Kang took over as showrunner from Gimple. And I think, and obviously if it was season 9 and I'm remembering that right, it was around the time that Rick disappeared, but it wasn't like one episode where all of those things happened at once. They just kind of happened somewhat simultaneously. They lined up. So those would be the obvious reasons. And the showrunners did talk about it a little bit at the time, but they didn't give us any, real like symbolic reasons or reasons why they changed that had to do with the story. It was more like, oh yeah, we're just changing things up, which always, that seems like a little crap to me. Like, why would they keep the same credits for so long and then change them so drastically? So, I mean, the obvious thing is that there's a different showrunner who just wanted to do something different, and Gimple gave her the go-ahead to do that. But I do think it's interesting that you mentioned Nicotero finally saying Grady is gone, because that's my personal theory about it, and not even necessarily Grady like that exactly, but I just think that whatever the reason, whatever the logic for the change in the opening credits, I think it's something that's not obvious to us. I don't think it's just that, oh, Rick's leaving, or, oh, there's a new showrunner. I think it's either something to do with Grady, it's some sort of shift in the narrative that's maybe happening off screen, maybe to do with Beth, like you said, maybe to do with Grady, that we aren't seeing yet. It also may have signaled like a shift to the CRM storyline. I mean, obviously Rick disappearing was a big part of that, but it seems like even though on screen after that they still had to do the Whisper storyline and the Commonwealth storyline, at that point we were also getting other spin-offs. So we were seeing The World Beyond, we were getting hints of things other places, and it just seemed like there was more of a focus on things that were happening outside of what's going on in the main narrative at, Alexandria and Hilltop. So we don't really know the writer's logic for doing that. We can only guess. But like I said, I think it's a lot more involved, I guess, than what they are telling us. It's not just that they switched showrunners or that, Andy left the show for a while. I think it's a lot more than that. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that, and that it may be symbolic in some ways. But again, we can only speculate. We don't know for sure. So I was going to say, I hope that helps. It probably doesn't help, but it's about the only answer we have right now. So thank you for the question. All right, next one. Most definitely unrelated to TWD, but I wish Scott Gimple was the showrunner behind Pretty Little Liars series. The mystery would have been perfect and the rewatch value. Instead, we got someone who prioritized outsmarting the viewer over crafting a good story. I wonder if he'd ever do a mystery thriller at some point. I think he would nail it. I think he would too. And, I actually love that about Gimple. I mean, the way that I've always explained this to people is, yeah, there's something to be said for the fact that moving as slowly as he has in the narrative and being as subtle as he is sometimes with the symbolism, sometimes you do lose the audience when that happens. So I've heard people who say, oh, that show doesn't know where it's going. It's just killing off characters without direction. Now, obviously, we know that's not true. Gimple has a reason for everything he does. It's just not obvious to everyone what he's doing or why he's doing it. And again, there's something to be said for keeping the audience engaged enough to follow what you're doing. Like, you can make that argument, and it would be a valid one. But one of the reasons that I respect Scott Gimple so much is not only that he's such a great writer and he's so good at putting in this nuanced imagery, but it's because he just does not give a crap. He does not care if people don't like what he's doing. He doesn't care if people aren't following it. He says, this is the story I'm writing. This is the story I've set out to tell, and I'm going to tell it, and I'm not going to change it just because people have an opinion about it. And the people who love it and want to follow me on it and be with me on the story will be with me. And that takes guts, especially for such a successful show. There's so much money, like ridiculous amounts of money tied up in the show, and it takes a lot of guts to stick to your guns when I'm sure he has all the pressure on the world on him to change things, you know. And thankfully, the studio is behind him because he is beholden to the studio. And if the studio tomorrow changed their minds and said, okay, we're going to do Daryl and Carol instead of Daryl and Beth, there probably wouldn't be anything Gimple could do about that. So thankfully, they are behind him. They seem to support him and his vision, which is obviously very good for us. But yeah, I have never watched Pretty Little Liars. I've heard that it's good. But yeah, I think Gimple would be awesome at anything he does. I would watch anything he does. He did a movie that was very like low budget. Not very many people saw it a few years ago that Norman was in. I want to say it was called Air. It had Jaimin Hansu in it, who is another actor that I like, and I watched it. Honestly, it was a little bit slow. It wasn't my favorite, but overall, I did enjoy the story. So yeah, I will probably watch just about anything Scott Gimple does, because I really do love his way of storytelling. So I hear you, but I mean, I especially liked what you said about how other stories try to outsmart the viewer, or it's just, what do you call that, like shock value. And I mean, the truth is, it would really ruin the show, The Walking Dead, if they started going for shock value, because they already have shock value. They already have like the grossest, gnarliest walker kills that they can find, and they already kill off characters a lot, you know, so shock value is almost cliche in The Walking Dead. So if they want to keep it going and they want to keep viewers attached to it, they really do have to go deeper than that, and Scott Gimple is really, really good at that. And, you know, to be fair, they do give us the shock value. It's not like I'm saying they don't. So yeah, thank you for that. I really enjoy that observation. Okay, next one. Currently watching the video you just uploaded today, and I have so many things my head may or may not explode. Mainly because I'm dealing with constant insomnia and haven't slept in around 30 hours. So if this ask is muddled, my apologies. Oh, I'm sorry. I know. Insomnia sucks. I hate it when I get insomnia. I don't get it very often, but like once every 6 months, I'll have a night where I just do not sleep. So I do understand. I had to say, sort of in response to an ask about how sad it is to see fans disparage Beth as a character and not acknowledge her role in Team Family. I get a lot of TWD TikToks, and every time Beth is mentioned, I always check the comments, and from what I've seen, it seems that she's universally well-liked and still missed to this day. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for telling us that. I'm so glad that you see good comments about her. I rarely see negative comments about her, so I'm guessing probably correctly that the hate comes from the Great Shipping Wars. Definitely. And as I think you or maybe other people have said, if they were certain Beth was RIP, they wouldn't be so angry. Yes. And, you know, the funny thing, too, though, is that that's definitely part of it. But also, I think they're threatened. They're threatened by it anyway. Like, I think there's some of them that do 100% think she's dead. But they're still threatened by the way that Daryl was staring at Beth over the dinner table. Like, yeah, he's hugged Carol and they've had some tender moments, but it's never been like that, right? So even if it like if we were to find out that she was 100% dead, they're still threatened by it because he still clearly had feelings for her that he doesn't have for Carol. But anyway, that's kind of splitting hairs. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Another thing might be asking a little too much, but from a writer's perspective, how would you plan about Beth's return and subsequent arc? Whew. Yeah, that's a question. I'd love to know what you would want to see happen there, and also add some extra bits for fun, not really anything to do with theories, like flashbacks. Beth returns to important locations from the past, like the farm, the prison, and the funeral home. I'm currently reading a fanfic where that happens, and it's hitting so hard in the feels. So outside of Beth TD, it would be cool to see these previous places shown again long after they were abandoned. Yeah, absolutely. Without going into too much detail, I can try to give you a rundown of things that I would like to see happen. But that's definitely one of them. And I think, so two things. There's both the places that have been before, and I would love to see her, I mean, I've said this before, I would love to see her go to Terminus and find some of Team Family's things that they left there, like Daryl's poncho. I would love to see her go, I mean, it would be really, really heartbreaking, but I would love to see her go back to the funeral home, or heavens, maybe even the golf course, the golf club, I mean, and go looking for him. Like, that would be really, really heartbreaking to see, but it would be a cool thing to see. But the thing is, keep in mind that during those missing days that we had filming at the White Cabin, there were other people there. Like, Alana Masterson was seen there. Stephen Yun was definitely filming there, and he was posting on social media about it. So, I mean, imagine how crazy it's going to be if we get flashbacks to what happened and suddenly Glenn is there again and Maggie together and, all the people we've lost, Abraham and Tara and Rosita and everything, like just seeing them on screen. And that's why I think it was so genius of them to film it back then. I mean, maybe even they didn't know how long it was going to be before we saw those scenes. But the point is, they're not going to be bringing the actors back to film those now, even though they could. it's going to be the people from season 5 because that is when it was filmed. And that's going to be just crazy and emotional to see that on the screen again. Like, I can't wait. I can't wait. It's going to be great. In terms of other things I would like to see, what else do I want to see? I kind of want to see both Beth and Daryl being a little bit aloof from each other at first. And not because of anything negative, but more like because neither of them can bring themselves to believe that the other one is actually there and actually alive, and then have a moment when they both kind of break down and get past that aloofness. You know, I think something like that would be great. I would love to see another kind of screaming match like they had in Still, but it would be like sort of something to mirror that in Still, and it would probably be over something completely different, and it would be, in a way, like almost a more, I almost want to say a more mature subject. Not that that one was immature, but just in the sense that they've both moved on. They're both different people now, and so it would be a completely different subject. Maybe even having to do with what happened in Atlanta, the fact that she got left behind, that, you know what I mean? I just would like to see them, like, yell at each other like that and really get everything out that's been festering for 10 years. Like, that would be, it would be just like Still. It would be really emotional, but also really, really cathartic. And so I would like to see something like that. And then, of course, you want to see reunions. You want to see the two of them react to each other's backstories. You know, so I feel like, assuming she doesn't know everything that's happened, he's going to be telling her a lot. He's going to be telling her how they lost Tyrese and how they lost Glenn and what happened with Negan. And he'll probably be telling her about the Whisperers. And there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, as far as we know, Beth doesn't even know she has a nephew. You know, she's going to be wondering if Maggie is even still alive. Like, it's probably not going to surprise her that a lot of people have died, because the world they live in, they lose people all the time. But it'll be a big deal for her to find out her sister is still alive, you know. So anyway, just lots of really interesting things that they could play with. And yeah, I mean, I think I, like most of you, have plenty of headcanons that we could go into, and I won't, because one's, you know, just as valuable or non-valuable as another. But yeah, there's lots of things I would like to see happen, and even if all those things don't happen, I'm just here for it. I'm just here for whatever story they want to tell and whatever they want to give us on the screen. I'm just really excited to see it all play out. So I will say that I am really excited for the finale of Daryl Dixon season 2, because I feel like that's going to be when he either sees Beth or in some way realizes she's alive. And I've been thinking lately about season 5, when he speaks with Noah and says, "Is there a blonde girl there?" And then Noah says Beth, and that's when they realize she is there. And just the look on Daryl's face, like, I think we're going to see something like that when he realizes that Beth is alive, only it's going to be like times a billion. It's going to be way bigger. It's going to be way more heartbreaking. And I'm excited to see that when he finally actually finds out, you know, or realizes, and to see his reaction. Because we all know that Norman can emote like nobody's business. So anyway, all right, so I'll move on now. But thank you for the question. I'm sure I could ramble for a long time on that, but I will not. Do we have time for one more? Yeah, we do. I was watching season 3, episode 9, when Daryl want to go with Merle. I noticed something. Glenn was mad and tell Daryl, "Do you want him to sleep in the same cell with Carol and Beth?" Even Glenn knew that Beth means so much to him. Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know that we can necessarily point to this as a romantic thing, but Glenn does know that Daryl cares about everybody in the group and that he watches out for them. And yeah, it is interesting that he mentions, I don't know, I think you could argue that because Beth was still so young here, maybe that's why Glenn mentions her. I kind of feel like because Glenn was so angry at Merle for what happened to Maggie, he was almost trying to, you know, shame Daryl into not having Merle come with them. He just really, really didn't want Merle there, so he was just going to throw out everything he could possibly think of to try to keep Merle out of the prison. And so it almost might have been him more playing on the fact that Beth was still a teenager at this point. She was 17 in season 3. And he was, you know, because Daryl then does respond with, "Okay, but Merle's not actually a rapist. Like, I'm not worried about that," kind of a thing. So I don't know. I think you could argue it either way, but it is interesting that they mention Beth here. They don't mention anyone else. They don't mention the children or, you know, Carl or baby Judith or anything like that. They do specifically mention Beth, which is interesting. Like I said, I think you logically could see it as not really anything romantic, but on the flip side, we all know that anything that's mentioned is mentioned for a reason. And let's not forget that season 3 is number 1, where we saw Daryl staring at Beth in episode 1 when she was singing. And then again, of course, in episode 9. But, and then it's also where she talked to Carol right before this because, or no, actually, I think it's right after this because he leaves with Merle. And we have that whole conversation where she's kind of crushing on Daryl. So yeah, again, from a logical standpoint, I think you could argue it a different way, but you're right that it does specifically mention her. And I don't think we can get away from the significance of that given all of the other hints we had that they were heading toward this in season 3. So yeah, that's a great thing to point out. Thank you for pointing that out for us. All right, I'm going to call it there for today, and I will be back in a couple days with more answers. Have a good one, guys.